Adam Schiff serves on the Intelligence Committee. He joins me now. Happy New Year, sir.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, listen, we have Phil Sciolaro back at the White House, John Podesta back in there, and you would assume this new blood is trying to keep this message and this momentum going. You've been critical at various points about the rollout here. Do you actually think we've turned the corner?
I think so. I'm very encouraged by what I saw in December when we had about 1 million people enroll through the federal exchange. And substantial enrollment through the state exchanges. We're now up to about 2 million. That's not as high as where we wanted it, but it's a lot better than things looked in October, November. So I'm very encouraged, and I do think that goal that was set at the outset, that milestone of about 7 million next year, is doable. And I also think it's going to deliver very important health care access to millions of people that haven't had it before.
At this point, even though you didn't get the 3 million, and even if you don't get to 7, if they come close, it seems like it'll be a victory. Of course, you have to deal with the re-election very quickly. I'm sure you've had many meetings on how to message this. To the extent you can share with us, how do you feel you're going to message the ACA as you go out and stump?
Well, a lot is going to depend on, the next few months. The enrollment was one thing, and we're over the worst of the bumps on the enrollment, as you point out. But the other is going to be, how do people like their plans? Are they getting the coverage? Are they getting the access to specialists and their primary care doctors? Right. I think those things are going to work well, and that's going to heavily influence, what people say out on the stump on this. But every time there is a problem, and there are going to be continuing problems with a reform of this size, one party has the interest in making this unsuccessful, so they're going to be out there inflating any kind of hiccup along the way. And it's going to be our job to tell the success stories, to point out the problems that we had before this reform, to talk about how many more people with pre-existing conditions can get access to health care and how people keep their kids on their policies. A lot of very positive changes here. As you alluded to, generally it doesn't start until Jan 1, so we don't know the positive stories really yet, so the messaging will probably counterbalance a lot of the negativity. You've been vocal about a couple other things, of course, because of your Intelligence Committee work. I want to quickly take a little bit of a turn into the NSA for a second here. We've had different court rulings. You want the info to be staying with the phone companies, and they've pushed back a little bit on that. What I want to know from you, because you're very involved in this kind of stuff, is where are we going to end up? We have the recommendations. We don't know what Obama's going to do. In 2014, will it be status quo? It won't be the status quo, and I was encouraged that the task force was as strong in its recommendations as it was. It truly was independent. I think the administration is going to take that very seriously. They're not going to do everything the task force recommended, but I do think we're going to see a restructuring of the metadata program, not only because it was recommended by this high-level group, but also because the Congress and the American people are very uncomfortable with the government getting all that data on domestic calls. We had a very close vote where the program almost went away completely, so I think that's going to force the administration to embrace reform of that. I think we'll also see changes in the FISA court. I
want to get everything in here, Congressman, so I just quickly want to ask you, if Snowden came home, what do you think would happen?
I think he'd be arrested, and I think he'd be prosecuted. And I think he should have stayed in this country if he had the courage of his convictions and been willing to stand up and take the heat rather than running off to these authoritarian countries like China and Russia, where there is no expectation of privacy, a real deep irony there. I do think he has kindled an important debate, and there'll be important changes to come about as a result of it. But we can't have a system where every employee that works in the intelligence community can decide on their own what they think the policy ought to be. That simply won't work, and it won't help protect the country.
Yeah, just quickly, I know we're tight on time, but I feel like we have to get to it on Benghazi. Mary Harf at the State Department briefing yesterday. Take a quick listen.
No indications at this point that core al-Qaeda directed or planned what happened in Benghazi. We do know, as we've said from the beginning, that extremists were involved. These folks don't carry ID cards. They don't come out and wear a T-shirt that says "I belong to al-Qaeda."
Listen, we're tight on time, but did this New York Times piece, is it really just about the nuance? I mean, close affiliation with al-Qaeda, loose affiliation. I mean, in the end, does it matter, or does it matter?
Well, I think you're right. It's an issue of characterization, and I think what you just played in the State Department characterization, that this was not a plan of core al-Qaeda, mission directed by core al-Qaeda, I think that's exactly right. But when you have people who are inspired by al-Qaeda or have ties to al-Qaeda, is that al-Qaeda involvement? I think it is. Is it a critical difference? Probably not, and particularly if we have to recognize the fact that we have to protect the country not only from al-Qaeda but from other militant organizations that may be equally lethal in any given instance. So from that point of view, it probably isn't that significant. It is something that we're going to need to get to the bottom of in terms of the investigation and prosecution of those responsible. And
maybe that's a valuable part of the piece, that maybe the focus was too much on al-Qaeda and the other elements might have slipped through the cracks a little bit. Congressman Schiff, we appreciate your time on this pre-New Year's